Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Fragrance Report, a podcast where we explore the relationship between fragrance, culture, and history. I'm your host, Anya, and today's episode is rather fascinating because we're going to dive into the fragrance backgrounds of each of the modern members of the royal family, both past and present. We're going to focus on their scent preferences and how this is reflected by their personality, their public lives, and what their preferences are. We're going to dive into fragrances worn by everyone from Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles III, William, Kate, Meghan, and Harry. I'm excited to dive in. But if this is your first time listening to this podcast, I publish a new episode of this podcast every Wednesday. I like to stay focused on fragrance history. That is my passion. But I also use this podcast as a vehicle to talk about what's new and up and coming in fragrance. If you're interested in learning about fragrance trends, what's going on, or even exploring some of my favorite fragrances week after week, this is the podcast for you. So be sure to follow this podcast. And if you're also watching this on YouTube, this podcast is available on Spotify. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, I do have a video version of this podcast on YouTube as well. As usual, I'm going to start off by sharing with you my favorite fragrances that I've been loving and wearing over this past week. I have introduced some old fragrances, or rather reintroduced some old fragrances into my collection, fragrances I haven't worn for a long time, but I've re-fallen in love with, and there have been some solid favorites that I've been obsessed with. One of those combinations has definitely been Banana Republic's Vintage Green and by Corel's Sharing Concept. And as we go into this episode a bit further, you might actually see some parallels between these scent profiles and the scent profiles that many in the royal family prefer. But Vintage Green is a beautiful green tea fragrance with some fig. It's a gorgeous fragrance. I use it nearly every day right now. And then I've also been really loving By Corel's Sharing Concept, which is a beautiful, soapy grapefruit scent. It has some green notes in it as well. It's absolutely gorgeous. And one of my favorite ways to wear these fragrances is actually together. As many of you, or I don't know if I've mentioned this on this podcast at all, but as some of you might be aware if you watch my TikTok, because I did do a video talking about this on TikTok, I actually wore these fragrances to my dance practice and I did receive a compliment on it. So I feel like these are the perfect fragrances to wear for a workout or for like an everyday occasion because they're just so easy. You can layer other fragrances on top of this if you prefer, but personally this has been my favorite winning combination. And I also love spraying these in my hair. I don't wash my hair every day. I'm actually on a hair health journey, trying to grow my hair, trying to really baby it and give it the love and the attention it deserves and needs. So that does involve not washing it every day because my hair is thin and breaks easily. Luckily, I seem to have a lot of it, but my hair does not do well if it's washed every other day, every day. I cannot do that. So I often like to scent my hair when I get out of the shower with some of these fragrances, and then I'll usually wash my hair about twice a week. So yeah, this does help me with those hair wash days or like those after hair wash days routines, if that makes any sense. So these I've been loving, but something that you might have not seen me talk about in a while, and I don't even know if I've mentioned this on YouTube before. I might have mentioned this on TikTok way back in the day, but Encre Noire à l'Extrême, this has been a fragrance that I've had for literally years, and it was one of the first fragrances I purchased because this is actually really affordable. It's an ambery, resinous, vetiver dominant perfume. This perfume is super focused on the vetiver, but it's definitely kind of like a dark, smoky, like I said, ambery, resinous version of vetiver, and it's meant to be a masculine fragrance. But to be completely honest with you, I have been obsessed with wearing this fragrance all the time. This has been one of my favorite fragrances for like I would say a week and a half. I just haven't thought to mention it yet because it's one of those perfumes that no one has really talked about in a really long time. This is by the brand Lalique, by the way, which is a classic fragrance house, but I have like this big bottle and I am making a dent in it, as you can see. I mean, I've made this dent over time, but this is genuinely a really beautiful fragrance, and it's kind of giving me like dark winter energy. It's giving me like that kind of like femme fatale aesthetic right now, and I don't often feel like that lately, but recently, whenever I've been wanting something a little bit dark, nothing like too sweet, this has been it. And it really just works. Like it works for what I wanted it to be. So this is a gorgeous fragrance, absolutely beautiful. I think you can still get it online for a relatively low price. But yeah, they have the Encre Noire version that is not the extreme, but I prefer the Encre Noire à l'extrême because I really wanted the increased intensity. And then two more fragrances that have absolutely stolen my heart. One that you might already know about has been Profumo di Fiorenze's Latte e Mandorla. This is a gorgeous almond fragrance that smells almost like almond milk, like cold almond milk. It's a very intriguing scent. I wear it all the time. I actually sprayed it on today. And then my other fragrance of the day, because of course I rarely wear just one perfume, but one fragrance that I've been absolutely loving is Honey Sweet by Snif. This is a beautiful fragrance with a light touch of honey. It's a really creamy perfume. It has some florals. It's so stunningly beautiful. It's easily one of those comforting scents that I've just been going towards over and over again, and I have been loving it with Latte e Mandorla by Profumo di Firenze. Now let's talk about the perfume history portion of this episode, the British royal family and their relationship with perfume. Now, if you remember previous episodes that we've done, whenever we've talked about the royals throughout history and their relationship with perfume, I've often mentioned how perfumery has long been a symbol of power, status, and prestige. It was a way for people to communicate wealth. If they were wearing more expensive ingredients, then they were able to communicate their status through that, through wearing these fragrances. But now I actually think that this perception has shifted. Instead of wearing like the super expensive fragrances, we often see royals using their status to champion British brands. And this is something that we see in their clothing a little bit more overtly, and we also see that in their personal care products, such as their perfume. And for those of you who don't know, the royals do have a responsibility to promote British economy internationally. So they not only promote British economy within their borders, but they also make sure to promote British designs and British companies internationally. And this is something that we also see in different, political arenas throughout the world. So, for example, here in the U.S., if you have a political figure like a president or a first lady, they're expected to wear and embrace American products and designers. Same thing in the United Kingdom. So these royals are expected to be the face of the British people, so they are supposed to promote British brands, and they do so with their perfume choices as well, which I find really interesting and kind of fascinating. We're going to dive into that in a bit. But first off, let's talk about one of the most beloved royals of all time. That is, of course, Princess Diana. Now, her relationship with fragrance was deeply personal. She gravitated towards elegant yet bold scents, which was very much in keeping with her personality. One of the most famous stories about her and her association with perfume came on her wedding day in 1981. Barbara Daly, her makeup artist, revealed that she chose Quelques Fleurs by the brand Ubigant for her big day, and this is supposed to be a lush floral fragrance with tuberose, jasmine, and rose. But she was only 19 years old when she was married to Prince Charles at the time, so she was, of course, very, and understandably so, very nervous, and she actually spilled the fragrance on her dress. And her dress is like this big, famous dress that was designed for her at this wedding. And it's famously had, I think, like a 20-foot train. It was absolutely insane. I actually had the honor of seeing this dress in person when I was very, very young. There was a traveling exhibit around the U.S., or I think it was like international, with some of her personal items, some of her outfits, and her wedding dress, and I actually got to see it in person. It was an amazing experience, but that was a really big dress. It was a big symbol. She was marrying into the British royal family, so this was a huge deal, and she actually had to move a little bit of this dress to cover up this stain that this perfume left behind because she had spilled it. Another favorite for her was Hermes 24 Faubourg. Now, this was a perfume that was named by her longtime butler Paul Burrell as one of her favorites, and this is a perfume with rich notes of orange blossom, vanilla, and sandalwood. According to him, she never left home without a spritz of it. Another fragrance that she is said to have very much loved was Penhaligon's Bluebells. This is a perfume that was released by Penhaligon's in 1978. It has since been relaunched, so it's actually available today. And this is a citrusy floral perfume, very much in keeping with both her preferences, which seem to have leaned very much in the floral realm, but also with her sense of obligation to support British brands. Penhaligon's is a renowned British brand. We're going to talk about them throughout this video. The late Queen Elizabeth II also chose British brands for her fragrance. She is said to have really loved White Rose by Floris. Floris is one of the oldest British perfume houses, and they're still around today. They have a long-standing tradition of supplying fragrances and other products to the British royal family. She is said to have really loved White Rose, and this is a fragrance with notes of rose, carnation, and musk. It's a powdery floral perfume. Moving on to one of my favorite members of the British royal family, we have Princess Catherine. She is rather a timeless person when it comes to her sartorial choices, and this is reflected in her fragrances. She is known for light and refreshing florals, and for her wedding day, she chose to wear white gardenia petals by the brand Illuminum. This is a delicate floral scent with notes of gardenia, lily, and jasmine. This fragrance, in my mind, paired excellently with her iconic Alexander McQueen gown. This was a gown that was provided to her by Alexander McQueen and designed by Sarah Burton. This dress is said to have taken inspiration from Grace Kelly's wedding dress when she married Prince Rainier of Monaco. On a day-to-day basis, she is said to gravitate towards Jo Malone's Orange Blossom, which is a light and bright citrus. Overall, it seems that her fragrance choices are a little bit more minimal than, say, Princess Diana's. Moving on to Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, she is known to be a little bit more innovative when it comes to her choices in fragrance. One of her favorite perfumes is said to be the wildly popular Jo Malone Woods, Sage, and Sea Salt. For her wedding to Prince Harry in 2018, Meghan is said to have chosen a bespoke fragrance by Floris London. This is a tradition that has been taken up by other royal brides in the past, and the exact perfume notes that she created remain under wraps, but this fragrance is said to have been inspired by the brand's perfume called Bergamotto di Postano, which is a citrusy Mediterranean inspired scent, and apparently there was also a tea note in there as well, so this is in keeping with her California roots. She is known to have been a California girl before she married Prince Harry, and they still reside in California now, so that does align with her fragrance taste as well. Now let's move on to Prince William and Harry. Now, their public personas are so very different, and it's interesting because when I was preparing for this episode and when I was trying to analyze what fragrances they're said to really enjoy, their differences in personality almost seem to be reflected in their fragrance choices as well. We're going to start with Prince Harry. Now, allegedly, he really enjoys or has enjoyed Davidoff's Cool Water for a really long time. This is one of those fresh aquatic fragrances, and it's one of the most iconic men's fragrances out there. This very much is in line with his background as an outdoorsman. He also did serve in the army. But then on the other hand, you have Prince William, and his favorite fragrance is said to be Penhaligon's Blenheim Bouquet. This is a perfume that was originally released in 1902, and it was commissioned by one of Princess Diana's relatives, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. And this is a perfume that has citrusy notes. It has an aromatic set of fragrance notes, as well as pine and spice. This perfume was also a favorite of Winston Churchill, and it's fascinating because when you look at the personality of the two brothers, Prince Harry is very much someone who deviates from tradition, so it makes sense that he would choose a modern fragrance, and Prince William is deeply rooted in tradition and a sense of duty, so it does align with his choice in going for a British brand that is steeped in tradition and history. And it's kind of fascinating when you compare the two personalities, when you compare the two princes, and when you see how their fragrances align with their outward personalities as well. Next up, let's talk about King Charles III, and he, surprisingly enough, just might be the biggest fraghead in the British royal family, because out of all of them, he is the one who seems to enjoy scent the most, and he's actually the only one in this video that has a collaboration with a fragrance brand, which I consider to be fascinating. But some of his favorite fragrances throughout the years have been said to be Green Irish Tweed by Creed. This is known as a refined and earthy scent that reflects his love of the countryside. He also seems to really love Dior Eau Sauvage. This fragrance was actually named in Spare, Prince Harry's memoir, as one of the fragrances that King Charles wore the most or wears the most. He is said to have slathered it on his face, on his neck, everywhere. So it seems that he really enjoys that fragrance. And he also apparently really loves Guerlain's Vetiver, which is an earthy green scent. To dive into King Charles's personality a bit, he is always known to have been an outdoorsman. He loves the countryside, he loves the outdoors, and in the 70s and 80s, he's actually one of the first people to really talk about the environment, organic farming, in a way that wasn't really being done at the time, because right now we talk about those things as if we have always been talking about them, but he was actually ridiculed a lot when he originally started talking about things like organic farming, because people wouldn't understand, or they couldn't understand, why he thought those things so important. But it's interesting how we look back at his previous actions right now, that he was actually way ahead of his time, and he still maintains this great love for the countryside, which he shares with his wife, Queen Camilla. Now, Queen Camilla's fragrances were a little bit hard to find for this video. I couldn't find what her favorite fragrance is said to be, so I'm not going to overlook her in this video on purpose. I think she absolutely does probably have a few favorite fragrances. I think it's worth noting that she also does share a love of the outdoors with Prince Charles, or with King Charles. They do really seem to bond over that, so I would assume that her favorite fragrances would also be floral, earthy perfumes that may or may not lean into what King Charles also likes to wear. But let's talk about King Charles's fragrance collaboration. Now, he collaborated with the fragrance house Penhaligon's to release a perfume called Highgrove Bouquet. Highgrove is one of his favorite places. It's actually his primary country residence, or at least it was when he was a prince. I don't know if it still is when he's a king, because then wouldn't it be Windsor Castle? I'm not sure. But Highgrove has been a place that he has loved for decades, and he came out with a fragrance collaboration with Penhaligon's called Highgrove Bouquet, inspired by this love of outdoors. Now, 10% of all the proceeds from this collaboration do go directly to the Prince's Foundation, which is a charitable endeavor that he's been associated with for a really long time. So yeah, surprisingly enough, King Charles is perhaps the royal family's biggest fragrance connoisseur, which I was not expecting when I first started researching for this episode. As we conclude this episode, let's dive into what a royal warrant is and why it's so significant. A royal warrant in general allows a brand to state that they have provided goods or services to the royal family for a period of at least 5 years. This helps boost their status when it comes to standing out in their industry. This also adds a layer of prestige to their brand, and it's a way for the royal family to promote this brand as a quality resource for their products. In this case, the fragrance brands that do possess royal warrants include brands like Floris London, as I mentioned. Penhaligon's has had a long-standing relationship with the royals, and Creed. Creed actually supplies fragrances to the royal family, but they also supply fragrances to other members of European aristocracy as well, and they've had a long-standing relationship with them too. So it's really interesting kind of looking into all the economics of these prestige brands, these brands that have been around for years and have the trust of the royal family enough to be able to be given this great accolade. And there are some other industries as well, not just in the fragrance industry, that do have royal warrants too. I do think the royal warrant is quite an interesting concept because it does allow these brands to continue this long-standing relationship with the British royal family. It's a way for them to really anchor in their prestige and leadership in their industry. And I do think it's a cool way for the British royal family to lend support to these brands over a continual period. So that's it for this episode. Let me know, what did you think of this topic? Would you like to hear more about royal families throughout Europe? If there's any topic that you want me to expand on in future episodes, do let me know, of course. But thank you so much for listening or watching this episode, and I will see you next time. Bye.